This video was brought to you by Ground News. For the past 50 years or so, Cyprus has been de facto divided into two countries, with the internationally recognized Republic of Cyprus controlling the south, and the Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus controlling the north. Despite the fact that the Republic of Cyprus claims the entire territory, and only Turkey recognizes the latter, the dispute has been stuck in deadlock since 1974. And Turkey still insists on what it describes as a two-state solution. Nonetheless, last month, the President of the European Parliament, Roberta Metsola, confirmed the EU's ambitions to support fresh attempts at peace talks between the two sides of ethnically divided Cyprus, saying that Europe would never be complete as long as Cyprus remains divided. Now, all of this comes after the election of Greek Cypriot President Nikos Christoulides in February this year, who made resuming reunification talks with Turkey one of his key election promises. So in this video, we're going to explain why Cyprus is divided into two, Erdogan's and the EU's differing positions on the issue, and whether the EU could really bridge the gap. Before we start, if you haven't already, please consider subscribing and ringing the bell to stay in the loop and be notified when we release new videos. Okay, so firstly, let's take a look at Cyprus's long and complex history. Since the ancient era, the island has been invaded by a succession of foreign settlers, but has largely retained its Greek cultural identity through the centuries after the Alexandrine Empire, even when under English, French, and Venetian rule in the 11th through 15th centuries. The roots of today's conflict, though, go back to 1570, when troops from the Ottoman Empire attacked Cyprus and laid siege to the current capital, Nicosia, and a city on the east of the island called Famagusta. The Ottoman Turks, whose descendants make up most of today's Turkish Cypriot community, then ruled the country until 1878, when administration of the island was passed to the British Empire. It was then formally annexed by the British in 1914, and declared a British colony after the newly proclaimed Turkish Republic relinquished any claim to Cyprus in 1923. At that time, a majority of Greek Cypriots, who made up nearly 80% of the population, wanted to get rid of the Brits and integrate the Greek Cypriot part of the island into Greece. This campaign for enosis, or political union with Greece, was led by EOKA, a guerrilla organization which launched a series of bombings targeting government and military offices in 1955. The ethnic tensions between Greeks and Turks only grew following this, and in response to these attacks, the Turkish paramilitary organization called TMT developed the Taksim movement, calling for the partition of Cyprus into two distinct states. But things ultimately failed to improve after Cyprus became independent in 1960, despite the fact that a power-sharing agreement with a Greek president and Turkish vice president was fixed into the country's constitution. Continued violence between the two communities resulted in the establishment of a United Nations buffer zone that would later become known as the Green Line, which is patrolled by UN peacekeepers. In July 1974, Turkish forces invaded northern Cyprus, resulting in the illegal occupation of 36% of the island's territory and the internal displacement of 162,000 Greek Cypriots. This arrival of Turkish settlers, the destruction of Christian monuments, and the changing of place names transformed the region socially and culturally. And in 1983, it unilaterally declared itself the Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus. Even to this day, while the Greek Cypriot Republic is internationally recognized, only Turkey considers the northern region a legitimate state. So, where does the EU come into all of this? Well, in 1990, Cyprus formally applied for EU membership, and UN negotiators, who had unsuccessfully been trying to broker a peace deal between the two sides for years, saw Cyprus joining the bloc as a potential step forward. But since it joined the EU back in 2004, the same year that the UN's Annan plan for reunification failed, the EU's stance on the Cyprus issue has remained firm. The EU's position respects the sovereignty, independence, territorial integrity, and unity of Cyprus, That is, a single, united Cyprus. Turkey's position, meanwhile, also remains pretty fixed. Just this June, President Erdogan said in a joint press conference with the Turkish Cypriot leader, if there is to be a return to the negotiating table, the only way to do this is to recognize the Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus. Now, it's worth noting that the Turkish Cypriot region is highly dependent on Ankara economically, given the impeded development of trade and tourism, and a lack of foreign investment in the north due to the country's split. Local media has also reported an increased number of Turkish soldiers around the UN buffer zone in recent weeks, with some 35,000 troops stationed in the north. In August, there was also the report of violence against UN peacekeepers near the village of Pila, who were working to prevent breaches of the buffer zone. So, given that the EU wants a one-state solution, but Turkey wants a two-state solution, is there any chance that the two sides could actually come to an agreement? Well, at the moment, the chances of an agreement are low, not least because the EU and Erdogan just aren't getting on brilliantly right now. Nonetheless, it would be imprudent to rule a deal out altogether, for the simple reason that Erdogan has proven to be a remarkably unpredictable and transactional politician over the years, especially when it comes to foreign policy. Erdogan's alliances and foreign policy priorities have fluctuated widely. Just look at how quickly and violently he turned on Israel. Only a few years ago, Turkey-Israel relations were on the up, but today, Erdogan is calling for Netanyahu to be trialed at The Hague. Similarly, until 2015, Turkey and Russia were basically enemies. Turkey was a member of NATO, and the two countries had a plethora of foreign policy disagreements. However, beginning in 2016, Erdogan developed a sort of strategic friendship with Putin, much to NATO's frustration. The point we're making is that Erdogan has made numerous foreign policy U-turns, which mean that a deal might be possible if EU-Turkey relations were to improve. There are promising signs of this as well. Turkey-Greece relations have been on the up for some time now, and this week, the EU Council provided recommendations for closer collaboration with Turkey on issues such as trade, energy, and migration, in an approach that the EU's High Representative for Foreign Affairs described as progressive, proportionate, and reversible. The EU Council also reiterated in June that the EU is ready to play an active role in supporting the UN-led process, and that it remains fully committed to a comprehensive settlement of the Cyprus problem, including a speedy resumption of negotiations. On the topic of EU unity, recent statements from NATO leader Jens Stoltenberg have been reported widely. Now, 21% of this reporting is coming from the left, while 51% is coming from the right. And if you compare the headlines, you'll see some interesting framing emerging here. And this is all possible thanks to our sponsor, Ground News, a website and app developed by a former NASA engineer on a mission to give readers an easy, data-driven, objective way to read the news. That's because every story comes with a quick visual breakdown of the political bias, factuality, and ownership of the source's reporting, all backed by ratings from 3 independent news monitoring organizations. For example, for the story we mentioned earlier, you can see the bias distribution of every outlet reporting on it, the complete factuality information, and the ownership data. And with their new Bias Insights feature, you can even get a breakdown of the specific differences between left and right reporting. And I especially like their My News Bias feature, which allows you to track your reading habits over time. You can view your own personal biases, from specific news outlets and political lean to specific topics and locality. I can even see who owns the majority of news that I consume. Now, I know that I personally benefited enormously from Ground News, and as a result, I've gotten much better at spotting political bias, and I've surprisingly challenged some of my own views. So I highly encourage all of our viewers to give Ground News a try. In fact, we're offering 30% off their Vantage plan to all viewers. This includes unlimited access to every feature, including to My News Bias. That offer is only available here too, so make sure that you go to ground.news/TLDR or click the link in the description to get started for under $6 a month.